I knew something was off with Mason before the rehearsal dinner even started. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Weddings are stressful. Families get emotional. People act differently when they're trying to keep everything running smoothly. But every time I looked across the room, my best friend's older brother was already looking at me. And every single time our eyes met, he looked away. The strange part wasn't that he looked. It was the expression on his face, like he wanted to say something, or stop something, or maybe confess something. I just couldn't tell which. My name's Julian, I'm 26, and until that weekend, I'd only met Mason twice. His younger brother, Augustin, was the groom. We'd been friends since college, and when he asked me to be one of his groomsmen, I didn't hesitate. We'd survived exams together, terrible apartments, and enough late-night fast food runs to qualify as brothers. So, when he invited me to spend the entire wedding weekend with his family at a lakeside resort, I figured it would be fun. I had absolutely no idea that I'd spend the next 3 days trying to understand why the groom's brother couldn't stop acting like I'd somehow turned his world upside down. The resort was beautiful. Wooden cabins sat around a quiet lake. Strings of lights hung between old oak trees, and everyone seemed to know everyone except me. The second I stepped out of my car, Augustin wrapped me in a hug. "You actually made it." I said I would. "I know. I'm just surprised your GPS didn't send you into the lake." "I almost trusted it." He laughed before grabbing one of my bags. "Come on, everybody's already here." As we walked toward the main lodge, people kept waving at Augustin. Parents, cousins, friends, his fiancée's family. The place buzzed with the kind of excitement that only happens before a wedding. Then Augustin suddenly stopped walking. Oh, perfect timing. I looked up. A tall guy was carrying 2 folding chairs across the lawn. Dark hair, athletic build, simple black t-shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked like he'd been helping set things up all morning. "Mason," Augustin called. The guy turned. For a split second he smiled. Then his eyes landed on me. The smile disappeared. Not because he looked angry. More like caught off guard. "Augustin," he said, setting the chairs down. "This is Julian. We've met." His voice was calm. Too calm. I searched my memory. Then I remembered. Christmas party. Almost 2 years earlier. We'd shaken hands for maybe 10 seconds before he disappeared to help someone outside. "Right," I said. "Good to see you again." "You too?" He offered his hand. The handshake should have been completely normal. Instead, the second our hands touched, Mason froze. Just for a heartbeat. His grip tightened slightly before he pulled away much faster than expected. "You okay?" Augustin asked him. "Yeah." "You sure?" "Just tired." He picked the chairs back up. "I've still got decorations to move." Then he walked away without another word. Augustin watched him go. Huh. What? My brother usually talks more than that. He seemed busy. I guess. But Augustin frowned for another second before shrugging it off. "Come on. Your cabin's this way." I didn't think much about it. Not then. The rehearsal dinner started a few hours later. Everyone changed into nicer clothes. Drinks started flowing, and conversations filled every corner of the outdoor pavilion overlooking the lake. I ended up seated between Augustin and one of his cousins. Across the table, Mason. Unfortunately. Not because I minded looking at him. Actually, that was becoming the problem. He was attractive in an understated way. Nothing flashy. No designer clothes. No perfect hair. Just someone who looked comfortable in his own skin. At least normally. Tonight, though, he barely spoke. He picked at his food, answered questions with 1 or 2 words, and every few minutes, I'd catch him looking at me, not casually, studying me. The first few times, I ignored it. By the 5th time, I started wondering if I had something on my face. Finally, during dessert, I leaned toward Augustin. Is your brother okay? Augustin looked across the table. Mason immediately looked down at his plate. I honestly don't know. He's been quiet. He hasn't been sleeping much. Wedding stress? Maybe. Before I could ask anything else, Augustin's mother stood up with a champagne glass. She wanted everyone's attention. People quieted down. She gave a heartfelt speech about family, love, and how impossible it was to believe her youngest son was getting married. There wasn't a dry eye at the table by the time she finished. Everyone applauded, including Mason. But while everyone else smiled, he looked almost sad. Later that night, after the dinner ended, people scattered around the property. Some gathered near the fire pit. Others headed to the bar. I decided to walk down to the lake. The air was cool. The water reflected the moon perfectly. It was peaceful. Exactly what I needed after hours of socializing. You escaped too. I turned. Mason, standing a few feet away with his hands in his pockets. I needed some quiet. So did I. An awkward silence settled between us. I hope I didn't make a weird first impression, he finally said. You didn't. I've been distracted. I noticed. He gave a small, embarrassed laugh. Sorry. No apology needed. He nodded. Neither of us moved. The lake stayed perfectly still. You and Augustin have been friends a long time? He asked. Almost 7 years? He's lucky. I think I'm the lucky one. Another faint smile crossed his face. This one looked genuine. For the first time all day, he seemed relaxed. Then someone called his name from the lodge. Mason. He closed his eyes briefly. I should go. Before leaving, he looked at me one more time. Julian. Yeah? If anything strange happens this weekend? He stopped speaking, shook his head. Never mind. Then he walked away, leaving me alone beside the lake with one question echoing through my mind. What on earth was he trying to warn me about? I barely slept that night, not because anything had happened, because nothing had. That was almost more frustrating. Mason had acted like he wanted to tell me something important. Then he'd stopped himself at the last second, walked away, and left me wondering if I'd misunderstood the entire conversation. By morning, I'd convinced myself I'd overthought it. Until breakfast. The resort's dining hall was already crowded when I walked in. Families laughed over coffee, kids ran between tables, and someone was already complaining about the weather, even though the sky was perfectly blue. I spotted Augustin waving me over. About time, he laughed. We thought you got lost. I almost did. You've been here one day. Exactly. Everyone laughed. The only person who didn't was Mason. He was sitting across from me, stirring his coffee without drinking it. His eyes lifted for just a second. We made eye contact. Then he immediately looked back down. Again. It was becoming impossible to ignore. After breakfast, the groomsmen split up to help with different jobs around the venue. Some moved chairs, others hung lights. I ended up helping carry flower arrangements from the reception hall to the ceremony site. Around noon, I ducked inside the storage barn to grab another crate. The room was cool and quiet. I bent down to lift one of the boxes. You shouldn't carry that one. I turned. Mason stood in the doorway. It's heavier than it looks. I've got it. I know. He walked over anyway. Before I could protest, he picked up the crate with one hand. I'll help. You don't have to. I know. There was that awkward silence again. We walked toward the ceremony area together. Were you ever going to finish what you started last night? His steps slowed. What do you mean? If anything strange happens this weekend. He sighed. I shouldn't have said that. But you did. I was tired. Mason. He stopped walking. For a long moment, he stared toward the lake instead of at me. Then he quietly said, "Have you ever met someone and felt like you already knew them?" The question caught me completely off guard. "I guess. It's a weird feeling." "It can be," he nodded. "Forget I asked." Before I could answer, Augustin yelled from across the lawn, "Mason, we need the ladders." "I'm coming." Just like that, the conversation ended, again. That afternoon, everyone had free time before the rehearsal. Some people went kayaking, others swam. I decided to walk one of the forest trails behind the resort. About 15 minutes in, I realized someone was behind me. Footsteps, not close, just there. I turned. Mason froze. For half a second, we simply stared at each other. "I wasn't following you." I raised an eyebrow. "You weren't?" "I came here first. I've been walking for 15 minutes. I took the longer trail." His explanation came so quickly that it almost sounded rehearsed. I couldn't help smiling. "You know that sounded suspicious." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know." For the first time since I'd arrived, he actually laughed. It wasn't loud, just genuine. "I promise I'm not stalking you." I'll choose to believe that. We started walking together. The path wound through tall pines, quiet except for birds and the occasional breeze. It felt strangely easy, different from every other conversation we'd had. "What do you do?" Mason asked. "I'm an architect." His eyebrows lifted. "Seriously?" "Yeah." "I thought Augustin said you worked in marketing." "I used to." "When did you switch?" "About a year ago." He smiled. "You seem happier talking about architecture." "I am. I can tell." There it was again, that feeling, like he'd been paying closer attention to me than someone should after only a couple of conversations. "What about you?" I asked. "I'm a photographer." "Full-time?" He nodded. "Weddings?" I laughed. "Really?" "Ironic timing." "Very. I mostly shoot people." I would have guessed landscapes. He looked at me for a second longer than usual. "I like expressions." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. He wasn't flirting. At least, I didn't think he was. But his voice had softened, almost unconsciously. We reached a small overlook above the lake. The view was incredible. "I come here every time my family visits," Mason said quietly. "I can see why." For several minutes, we simply stood there, comfortable, silent, peaceful. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His expression immediately changed, serious again. "I have to go." "Everything okay?" "Yeah." He hesitated. "No." I frowned. "Mason." He looked like he wanted to say something, again. Instead, he asked, "Julian, can I ask you something weird?" "Sure." "Are you seeing anyone?" The question surprised me. "No." "You haven't met someone recently?" "No." He looked almost relieved, then immediately guilty for looking relieved. I shouldn't have asked. "It's okay." "No." He shook his head. "It really isn't." Before I could stop him, he turned and headed back down the trail. I watched him disappear between the trees. What was going on with this guy? That evening, the wedding rehearsal finally began. Everyone took their places. The officiant explained where to stand. Parents practiced walking. Bridesmaids laughed every time someone messed up. Everything felt normal, until Augustin suddenly stopped the rehearsal. "Where's Mason?" Everyone looked around. He'd disappeared. His mother frowned. "He was just here." A cousin checked outside. Nothing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, Mason returned from the direction of the parking lot. His hair was slightly messy, his breathing uneven. "You okay?" Augustin asked. Yeah. Where'd you go? I needed some air. His answer sounded rehearsed. Again, nobody pushed him. But as everyone resumed practicing, I noticed something sticking out of Mason's jacket pocket, the corner of an old photograph. It was bent from being folded too many times. As he turned, it slipped halfway out. For one brief second, I saw my own face, a picture of me, not recent, at least 2 years old. Before Mason realized it was visible, he shoved it back into his pocket. Our eyes met. His face went completely pale, and that's when I knew. Whatever was happening had started long before this wedding weekend. For the rest of the rehearsal, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept replaying the same moment in my head, the photograph. It had only been visible for a second, but I was certain I'd seen my own face, not a selfie, not something from social media that had accidentally popped up on his phone. It had been a printed photograph, folded, old enough for the edges to be worn. Every logical explanation I came up with sounded ridiculous. Maybe Augustin had given him pictures while planning the wedding. Maybe it wasn't me. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. Dinner after the rehearsal was much livelier than the night before. Music played softly through outdoor speakers while everyone gathered around long wooden tables under strings of lights. People toasted the bride and groom. Children chased each other across the lawn. For everyone else, the weekend felt exactly the way a wedding weekend should. For me, every time I caught Mason looking in my direction, I wondered if he knew I'd seen the photograph. He barely touched his food. Around halfway through dinner, Augustin stood up. All right, he announced. I've got a terrible idea. Everyone laughed immediately. I knew those words were coming, his father muttered. We're playing wedding trivia. Groans echoed around the tables. The winning team gets first pick of desserts. Suddenly, everyone became competitive. Names were drawn at random. Of course, I ended up on Mason's team. Augustin grinned. Perfect. Maybe my brother will actually smile tonight. Mason rolled his eyes. I smile. No, his sister replied. You used to. The table laughed. Even Mason managed a small grin. For the next half hour, we answered ridiculous questions about the bride and groom. Who made the first move? Where was their first date? Who said, I love you first? I barely knew half the answers. Luckily, Mason seemed to know everything. You've got an unfair advantage, I whispered. I've known Augustin his whole life. Exactly. He looked at me. You've known him 7 years. True, but he hesitated. He talks about you a lot. I blinked. He does? Mason nodded. You're one of his favorite people. I smiled despite myself. That goes both ways. For the first time that day, Mason looked genuinely happy. Just for a second. Then the moment disappeared. Our team ended up winning. Mostly because Mason remembered embarrassing childhood stories no one else knew. As everyone lined up for dessert, Augustin pulled me aside. Can I ask you something? Sure. What do you think of my brother? The question surprised me. He's nice. That's it? I don't really know him. Augustin scratched the back of his neck. I've never seen him act like this. Like what? He keeps disappearing. I noticed. And he keeps asking about you. I stared at him. He what? Augustin lowered his voice. Yesterday he asked how long we've been friends. So? This morning he wanted to know if you were single. I felt my stomach tighten. He asked me that too. Augustin frowned. Seriously? I nodded. Has he ever met you somewhere else? Not that I remember. Huh. He looked toward the dessert tables where Mason stood talking to their mother. I've known him 30 years. And? I've never seen him nervous around anyone. Later that evening, everyone gathered around a large bonfire near the lake. Someone brought guitars. Another cousin started roasting marshmallows. The atmosphere became quieter, more relaxed. I found an empty log and sat down. A minute later, Mason sat beside me, not too close, not far away either. For a while, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled between conversations. Finally, he said quietly, "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For acting strange." I laughed softly. "I was starting to think you didn't like me." His head snapped toward me. "What?" "You barely looked at me." "I looked at you too much." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Silence. Mason closed his eyes. "I didn't mean..." "It's okay." "No." He rubbed his forehead. "I keep making this worse. You don't have to explain if you don't want to." "I do want to." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I just don't know how." We watched sparks drift into the night sky. "I saw the photograph," I finally said. Everything about him froze. "What?" "In your pocket." His face lost all color. "You saw that?" "I think it was me." He stared into the fire for several seconds. Then he nodded once. "It was." I waited. He didn't continue. "So?" I asked gently. "Why do you have a picture of me?" His fingers tightened around the paper cup he was holding. "I wasn't supposed to bring it." "That doesn't answer the question." "I know." Another long silence. Finally, he looked at me. Not nervous anymore, just honest. "I've had it for almost 2 years." I couldn't hide my confusion. "Mason, we actually met more than twice." My heart skipped. "We did? You just don't remember." He stood up. "Come with me." Without waiting for an answer, he started walking toward the empty dock. Curiosity got the better of me. I followed. The lake was almost perfectly still. Music from the bonfire faded behind us. Once we reached the end of the dock, Mason leaned against the railing. "It was a charity fundraiser," he said quietly. "Almost 2 years ago." I searched my memory. "I've volunteered a few." "I know." "You were there?" He nodded. "My photography company was hired to cover the event." Slowly, pieces began coming back. The hotel ballroom, the silent auction, hundreds of people. I remember the fundraiser. You helped an elderly man after he collapsed. My eyes widened. The memory returned all at once. The man had fainted near one of the tables. Everyone froze. I'd called for help while staying with him until paramedics arrived. "It was you?" Mason said. "I photographed everything that night." "I didn't know." "You never noticed me." I felt guilty immediately. "I'm sorry." "You don't have anything to apologize for." He smiled sadly. "You were focused on helping someone." He reached into his jacket. Slowly, he unfolded the worn photograph. This time he handed it to me. It wasn't a posed picture. It showed me kneeling beside the elderly man while holding his hand and trying to keep him calm until medical help arrived. I barely recognized myself. "I took this," Mason said. "You never saw it because we only delivered the event photos to the organizers." I looked at the picture again. "I don't understand." "I couldn't throw it away." "Why?" He laughed quietly. "Because that was the first time I ever saw someone make kindness look effortless." I looked up. His eyes were fixed on the lake. "I spent 2 years trying to convince myself I'd imagined how I felt after that night." He swallowed. "And then Augustin told me his best friend was coming to the wedding." He finally looked at me. "I never expected it to be you." The breeze across the water suddenly felt much colder, because everything finally made sense. The stares, the questions, the nervousness. Mason hadn't been hiding a secret from the wedding. He'd been hiding one he'd carried for 2 years. I must have stared at that photograph for a full minute. It was strange seeing myself through someone else's eyes. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't posing. I looked completely focused on the older man lying on the floor, barely aware that hundreds of people were watching. I don't even remember this picture being taken, I admitted. You weren't looking at me. I didn't know you were there. I know. Mason smiled, but there was something bittersweet behind it. I spent a long time wondering if I should tell you. And I always decided no. Why? He laughed quietly. Because what was I supposed to say? He looked at me for a second. Hi, we met once for 30 seconds while you were helping save someone's life, and I've thought about you ever since. I couldn't help laughing. When you put it like that, it sounds insane. It sounds unexpected. He nodded. Exactly. The lake was silent around us. Neither of us seemed eager to go back to the party. I tried forgetting about you, Mason admitted. I dated, worked, traveled. I even deleted that picture once. You did? I restored it from the recycle bin 15 minutes later. I smiled. So this whole weekend, I've been trying to convince myself you're just Augustine's friend. And every conversation made that harder. There was something so honest about the way he said it that I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me all evening. Why didn't you just talk to me? I wanted to. So what stopped you? His expression turned serious. Because I didn't know if you were even interested in men. That answer landed harder than I expected. You never asked Augustine? I almost did. But what if he asked why? Fair point. So I spent 2 days trying not to make things awkward. I laughed. I don't think that part worked. He covered his face with one hand. I know. We walked back toward the bonfire together. People were still talking and laughing. Nobody seemed to notice we'd been gone. Well, almost nobody. Augustine noticed immediately. He looked from me to Mason, then back again. A slow grin spread across his face. Oh. Mason frowned. What? Nothing. Augustine, I'm saying absolutely nothing. You've got that face. What face? The one that got you grounded when you were 16. Everyone nearby laughed. I have no idea what you're talking about, Augustine replied innocently. You absolutely do. His younger sister joined in. I haven't seen Mason smile this much in years. I smile? No, she said. You tolerate happiness. Their mother laughed so hard she nearly spilled her drink. Watching them tease him made something click for me. Around me, Mason had seemed guarded, with his family. He was completely different. Still quiet, still calm, but warm, comfortable. It made me wonder how much of the nervous version I'd seen all weekend had only existed because of me. The wedding morning arrived far too quickly. The entire resort buzzed with activity. Hairstylists rushed between cabins. Photographers carried equipment everywhere. Music floated through open windows. As one of the groomsmen, I spent most of the morning helping Augustine stay calm. I think I'm going to throw up. You're getting married. I know. That's usually the idea. I'm serious. You'll be fine. I can't find my cufflinks. They're in your pocket. He checked. They are. He sighed dramatically. I need coffee. You've had 3. I need emotional coffee. Before I could answer, someone knocked on the cabin door. Mason. Augustine. What? The florist needs you for 5 minutes? I'll be right there. Augustine looked between us. You two stay here? Then he disappeared before either of us could object. The cabin suddenly became quiet. Mason leaned against the doorway. I wanted to thank you. For what? For last night? You don't have to thank me. I do. You listened? I shrugged. I figured you deserved that. His eyes softened. You always do that. What? Make people feel comfortable. I laughed. I don't think that's a special talent. I do. He walked farther inside. There was something else. What? I don't expect anything. I frowned. What do you mean? I told you because I didn't want to spend another 2 years wondering what would have happened if I'd been honest. He took a slow breath. But this is Augustine's wedding? I'm not here to complicate your weekend. So? He smiled gently. Whatever happens after today is entirely your choice. There wasn't any pressure in his voice, no expectation, just sincerity. Oddly enough, that made my answer much easier. I'd like to get coffee with you. He blinked. What? After the wedding? You mean, I mean a real conversation? His expression didn't change immediately, like he wasn't sure he'd heard me correctly. You don't have to decide anything today, I continued, but I'd regret it if we never saw each other again. For the first time since I'd met him, Mason looked completely speechless. Then, very slowly, he smiled. Not the polite smile I'd seen all weekend. Not the nervous one. A real one. It completely transformed his face. I'd like that, he said quietly. So would I. At that exact moment, Augustin walked back into the cabin. He stopped dead in the doorway, looked at both of us, then sighed dramatically. I knew it. Mason rolled his eyes. You know nothing. I know my brother. He pointed at me. And I know my best friend. Then he grinned. I also know neither of you has any chance of hiding anything from Mom. Mason's eyes widened. Oh no. Their mother appeared behind Augustin almost on cue. She looked at the two of us, then at Augustin, then back at us. A knowing smile spread across her face. Finally, Mason buried his face in his hands. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. His mother walked over and kissed his cheek. I've been waiting all weekend for you two to stop pretending. I looked at Augustin. You knew? He shrugged. I suspected. His mother laughed. I've been watching my son all his life. She looked at Mason with unmistakable affection. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at Julian. Mason didn't even try to deny it. He just shook his head in embarrassed defeat. And somehow, watching his family accept everything so naturally made me feel even more certain that saying yes to coffee had been the right decision. The ceremony started just before sunset. The chairs overlooking the lake filled one by one until every seat was taken. Music drifted through hidden speakers. The water reflected the golden light perfectly. It felt like one of those moments people spend years trying to recreate in photographs. Ironically, Mason barely touched his camera. He'd hired another photographer for the wedding. For once, he wanted to experience it as a brother instead of documenting it from behind a lens. I stood with the other groomsmen as Augustin took his place at the altar. He looked nervous. Then he saw his bride. Every ounce of anxiety disappeared. I'd never seen him smile like that. The ceremony itself was beautiful, simple, honest. No dramatic speeches, no over-the-top promises. Just two people who clearly adored each other choosing to build a life together. When the officiant finally announced them as husband and wife, everyone stood to applaud. I glanced toward Mason. He was clapping, but there were tears in his eyes. Happy tears. He noticed me looking. Embarrassed, he laughed and wiped his face. I always cry at weddings. You photograph them for a living. Exactly. So you've cried hundreds of times? He smiled. Pretty much. The reception carried on late into the evening. Music, dancing, terrible karaoke from Augustine's cousins. The entire family seemed determined to celebrate until sunrise. I was standing near the dessert table when someone nudged my shoulder. Mason. You dance? I survive dancing. Good enough. He nodded toward the dance floor. My mother won't stop asking why we aren't over there. Is she matchmaking? Oh, absolutely. I laughed. Should we save ourselves? I think it's too late. Before I realized what was happening, his mother appeared beside us. There you are. Mason sighed dramatically. I knew this was coming. She ignored him. Julian? Yes? Would you do me a favor? Sure. Please dance with my son. Moom. She smiled innocently. What? You've never been subtle. I raised 3 children. I know exactly when to stop pretending not to notice things. Mason looked completely defeated. I couldn't help laughing. I don't mind. His mother patted my arm. I had a feeling. Then she disappeared before either of us could answer. We looked at each other. Well, Mason said, I guess we've been assigned. I've survived worse. Oh? I once danced with Augustine. He winced. My condolences. The band switched to a slower song. Nothing overly romantic, just something relaxed. We stepped onto the dance floor with several other couples and family members. I should warn you, I said. I'm terrible at this. I photograph dancing. I don't actually dance. So we're equally qualified. I laughed. The conversation came easily now. None of the awkward pauses from the first 2 days remained. It felt strange how quickly everything had changed. Or maybe it hadn't changed at all. Maybe we'd simply stopped pretending. You know, Mason said quietly, I almost skipped this wedding. I looked at him. What? When Augustine first told me his best friend was named Julian, I didn't connect it. But when I saw one of your social media pictures a month later, you recognized me. He nodded. I panicked. Why? Because I convinced myself meeting you again would ruin the version of you I'd built in my head. And did it? He smiled. No. It made you more real. That answer stayed with me. We continued swaying gently while people laughed around us. I've got a confession, I admitted. Oh? I thought you hated me. He looked horrified. What? The first day? You barely spoke. You kept disappearing. You looked miserable whenever I walked into a room. He covered his face. I cannot believe I did that. You really thought I wouldn't notice? I thought I was hiding it. You absolutely weren't. He groaned. I've photographed celebrities without getting nervous. And I couldn't hold a normal conversation with you. I smiled. I noticed. Near the end of the night, guests began gathering outside for a sparkler exit. The bride and groom walked through a tunnel of lights while everyone cheered. The photographers captured dozens of pictures. Cars slowly began leaving the resort. The weekend was ending. I stood by my car, loading my overnight bag into the trunk, when I heard footsteps behind me. Mason. I was hoping I wouldn't miss you. You didn't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he held out a small envelope. What's this? The photograph. I looked inside. It was the same picture from the charity fundraiser. I can't take this. I want you to. You've kept it for 2 years. I know. So why give it away? He smiled softly. Because I don't need a photograph anymore. I looked up. You don't? I know where to find you now. For a second, I couldn't think of anything to say. Finally, I laughed. That's a much better line than the ones you've used all weekend. I've had 2 years to think. I can tell. He rubbed the back of his neck. So? Coffee? I pretended to think about it. He smiled nervously. I suppose I have time next Saturday. His shoulders relaxed. Really? I did promise. I just wanted to make sure you hadn't changed your mind. I haven't. I pulled out my phone. I think we're missing something. What? You still don't have my number. He laughed. That would definitely make coffee difficult. We exchanged phones and saved our contact information. As he handed mine back, our fingers brushed. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. Drive safely, he said. You too. I got into my car, started the engine, then rolled the window back down. Hey, Mason. Yeah? I'm glad you didn't throw that photograph away. He smiled. I'm glad Augustine invited you. I drove away with the picture resting on the passenger seat beside me. A photograph that had captured the beginning of a story neither of us understood at the time. A story that almost never got a second chance. A week later, we met for coffee. It turned into lunch. Lunch became an afternoon walk through the city. Before we realized it, 6 hours had passed. There were no awkward silences anymore, no hidden secrets. Just two people finally getting to know each other without fear getting in the way. Months later, Augustin liked to joke that his wedding had accidentally created 2 happy couples instead of 1. His family never let us forget it, especially his mother. Every anniversary she would grin at us across the dinner table and say the exact same thing. I told you to stop pretending. And every single time, Mason would laugh, because she had been right all along.